Hi, and welcome back to another episode of The Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Voisin, and my guest this week is Dr. Ariana Ebrahimien. She's a functional and airway-centric dentist who has improved breathing and facial architecture for hundreds of patients using integrative techniques that really work because they align with our design. So what better topic than for The Architecture of Health, as we're regenerating and restoring, than to talk to her. She specializes in facial orthotropics. It's a facial growth guidance system that helps correct the root cause of improper oral posture. In my own son's case, his teeth were kind of growing in on top of each other. He was allergic to everything, constantly had a stuffy nose, and his chin was just getting more and more receded. And then she taught me that you can grow your face out to help the teeth straighten instead of push the teeth in. So welcome to our show, Dr. Ariana. I'm so glad you could make it.
Thank you so much for having me, Deb.
And I just gave the hint to the audience how I met you. My son was
Yes.
going through a crazy health crisis. We were down to lamb and white rice, chemically sensitive to everything. And I had no idea that you can double the size of your airway in various ways, or that the teeth are floating in this more of a fluid matrix than we ever even think of this being a living, dynamic system, and that there's so much we can do if you have the right information. So tell me, how did you even get started? Because that's what it took me, is that my world falling apart for me to find something, like for me to find most of the things I have on this show. How did you get introduced to this idea of I would call it regenerative integrative dentistry?
Yeah. Well, I was very fortunate to actually kind of stumble into this at the very beginning of my career. I mean, I had just graduated from dental school and I went to practice with my father, and he had connected with a very forward-thinking orthodontist by the name of Dr. Bill Hang down in Los Angeles, and had ultimately enrolled us, both of us, in a four-part mini residency. And it was about this orthotropics topic. And at the time that my father enrolled us, I was thinking, I don't know why you're doing this. This isn't really something I'm interested in. I don't really anticipate having a large pediatric patient population. But man, I think I maybe had my license for about 2 months by the time I went down to this course. And the first thing we learned about on day one was the relationship between the jaws, where the jaws are positioned in the face, and the tongue and the teeth, and how that influences the size of your airway. And then peeling back even one more step, looking at how really malleable this is, how our oral posture is the biggest influence upon our facial growth and development, how it actually has very little to do with our genetics. And so that just kind of sent my career in a totally different trajectory than I ever could have anticipated. Also, a way more fulfilling trajectory than I think I would have expected for myself. And yeah, I started down this road. In the process of taking that course, we learned about obstructive sleep apnea and how the position of the jaws can actually contribute to obstructive sleep apnea, and then realizing as we kind of went down the list of symptoms that perhaps my own younger sister was suffering from this. And so in that year while we were receiving this education, we also were on a journey with my younger sister, getting her tested for sleep apnea, realizing that she indeed had it, learning that we felt that her orthodontics that she had received earlier in her life, before we knew any of this, had probably contributed to the formation of that sleep apnea. And so then looking at doing double jaw surgery to reverse the orthodontic treatment she had had as a young teenager. So, which she ultimately ended up doing. She did end up having double jaw surgery and eliminated her sleep apnea and restored her facial balance and restored the size of her airway. So that was great. And at the same time, when you walk through that process with somebody so intimately, you're spending the night in the hospital with them and you're looking at what that recovery looks like, it was really, really motivating for me to work with children to prevent that. Like, what do I have to do for children to prevent ever having this conversation when they reach adulthood? And so that's really what really kind of cemented my career path for me. And here
Wow.
I am over 17 years later.
Wow.
Yeah, working with
Wow.
kids and they're getting younger and younger, Deb. They're getting younger and younger. So,
Yeah, and to
yeah.
that point, you're picking them at before specific developmental like growth spurts are happening, and you're guiding the growth instead of having to later go in and in your sister's case having to cut open, and instead you're guiding
Right.
growth and behavior. There's the
Right.
tongue exercises, and I started mouth taping every night once I had to pay Jeannie to teach Sebastian, and yeah, incredibly important. And what's crazy is we don't even know we're supposed to nasal breathe. Like, it's
Yeah.
just we're surrounded by this mixture of nasal and mouth breathing. And while I was working with you guys, I learned about Buteyko breathing, and then I found the book Shut Up,
And breathe.
Shut Your Mouth and
And
Save Your
breathe.
Life.
Yeah.
Shut Your Mouth, Save Your Life is like a 1798
Yeah.
book.
George Catlin, I think, was the author of that way back in the right 18th century.
Way back, yeah, way
Yeah.
before we had surgery and drugs and all these other there were physical ways people modified our structure, or at least it was more common that everybody had a more aligned structure. So when someone had a misaligned structure, they were the sick one, or that was more rare. And now almost everyone around us, we're surrounded by all these toxic chemicals all the time, and almost all of us are fighting a little something. So of course we're mouth breathing. Then our whole structure shifts. So when you got started in this, what were some of the specific things that helped you go, oh yeah, wow, I didn't know our system was that malleable? Were there specific facts or cases or uh, body
Yeah,
systems?
for sure. I mean, I felt very fortunate to work with a mentor who is actually doing the work. Some people have been teaching for so long, they're not really doing the clinical practice anymore, but he absolutely was. I mean, and a lot of this coursework was hands-on, seeing the patients he was actively treating, and I mean, hundreds and hundreds, and probably at this point thousands of patients he had worked with and seen the befores and afters and the befores and afters. I mean, and when you start to see that with your own eyes, um, people who say things can't be done should get out of the way of people actually doing them, right? That's what we always kind of are saying in our house. Um, he was doing it, and it's like, okay, so clearly if it's been done before, it can be done again. And so let's go. And yeah, some of those first early cases I look back on those now and I think, wow, I also had the advantage being a general dentist of following these young children throughout their growth, like long after our active orthotropic treatment was finished. So I got to see this play out over years. I think my very first patient, I treated him when he was 8 years old, and I got follow-up pictures all the way through his early 20s. And it was incredible to me that like the trajectory that we had helped put him on when he was 8 years old, it maintained, it stayed. His face continued to grow in the direction it should grow. His face continued to remain well balanced. His teeth continued to stay aligned, even though we hadn't given him any retainers, because he had corrected the root cause. I mean, orthotropics really is based on the tropic premise as developed by Dr. John Mew many, many years ago, which is that if your teeth are lightly touching and your lips are closed, your tongue is up to the roof of your mouth, if you have that kind of oral posture all the time from infancy onward, you should achieve your full genetic potential. But as you said, there are so many things that get in the way of having that excellent oral posture, whether it's the toxins that are floating around in our air, the soft food we're eating, the allergies that we're experiencing, the inability to breastfeed for long periods of time. There are all sorts of things that get in the way of that. And so the normal now for us are underdeveloped faces. I mean, we look around and that's all you see. So it's unusual when you said like we don't even know we're supposed to breathe through our nose. Like, yeah, because that's not necessarily the normal anymore, right? Even though it should be. It's not
Mhm.
common, I should say.
And,
So that's really what kind of like let me know, hey, this can be done. Let's do it.
and I'm fortunate through my son's healing journey to have learned about pioneers like Weston Price that correlated the diet and the lifestyle to the oral, the cranial structure and the healthy teeth, healthy wide smiles. And with the teeth have plenty of room, they aren't decaying as much.
Yeah.
The and there's just so much that naturally happens. And the beautiful thing though is learning that we're mostly these pressurized fluid systems. Humans are not these cemented static objects. There's a lot of movement. And can you correct me on this? I probably misspoken this fact. I believe I heard that the pressure between the tongue and the lips is something of many magnitudes greater than of braces.
Oh,
Something
yes,
like
yeah, so
I've
w
heard 300 times, but I could be dead
yeah,
wrong.
so when we swallow, our tongue exerts
Mhm.
about 500 grams of pressure against our teeth. Our lips, I think, are like 300, 250 to 300 and grams of pressure. And when we use braces, so brackets and wires, we're using about 2 grams of
Oh,
pressure to
I
move
was
teeth.
right. Oh my God.
Yeah,
People cannot believe that because the
yeah,
common practice is to push the teeth together and put the wire on. Wow.
right.
What myths? I mean, we've already sort of discussed a few already. What myths people and misunderstandings people have about their teeth, tongue, and facial architecture. I mean, the first that I just described is that it's not malleable. You've mentioned that as well. Second is that the solution is cramming the teeth together rather than working with the bodies. Are there other misconceptions people had? Okay, okay, and I gotta level with you. The From a financial point of view, looking at investing on the front end, making a big investment early on, it seems like people would rather postpone that choice. And if you think about it, the price between having to do braces versus growing out the face, my thoughts are there are probably some economic misunderstandings. And as you're saying, what you're looking at is for the life of this patient because you're looking at the root cause. Versus you could have a retainer and then another retainer, and then you could maybe so, are there other how would you describe that people's misunderstanding in terms of how going this direction it looks as a choice versus other choices for managing, say, crooked teeth?
That's a great question, Deb. And it really plays actually into another one of these myths, which is that, or uncommon facts is that, 60% of your cranial growth is complete by age 6, and 90% of your cranial growth is complete by age 12. So the common practice of putting braces on teeth at age 13, 14, 15, 16, my mentor used the analogy like we're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, what are you really doing at that point? Your facial growth, your cranial growth is largely complete. So now, when I get a 13-year-old patient, and there's a lot of crowding, it's like, oh man, like we really missed a window of opportunity here because when you were 7 years old and you had more growth ahead of you, we could really start to guide that growth and make the jaws bigger, and you see that reflected in the actual jaw structure. Whereas 14 years old, I don't really have the ability to do that. I'm really just kind of tipping and moving teeth around and doing my best, which is why so much of the conventional traditional orthodontic approach has been about taking teeth out or trying to make teeth on jaws fit on jaws that don't fit well together. And so the mechanics that they're using to do that can be, in my opinion, really just really problematic. They can be really harmful to the airway and the jaw joints and facial growth. And the profile. So that's, I think, one of the biggest I don't know if I'd call it a myth, but people just don't realize that investing earlier in this kind of treatment is far, far more advantageous for your child in the long run because you can do so much more.
You can take that growth curve that already exists. At the same time, I have seen some people with ALF or something or craniosacral, even okay, functional patterns is one of these. They're in our tribe of
Uh-huh.
wildly optimistic people who get results, right? And they some of their training, they have people strengthen the platysma. Is it called the
The
platysma here?
platysma, yeah.
And then they're really and most of these people I'm training with now also are really into tongue placement, maybe doing some vacuum breathing to repressurize. So it's getting closer to the front of the fitness world that the people getting like unexpected results are including oral posture and breath as another repressurizing mechanism. So I'm glad to be in such good company. And if I hadn't worked with you, I wouldn't have realized that. Oh, that's the mark of a truly regenerative movement professional is that they address the tongue pressure and the jaw and the breath. What so you've talked about orthodontics, traditional orthodontics not being so great at age 13, and even in your sister's case, having to undo the
Mhm.
damage that was done by the orthodontics, and that's so tragic. that there have been so many things I've spent a lot of time and money on and just trusted that it was working. And I didn't really have a way to tell that it wasn't working. Like there might be and that's the same with a lot of these medical studies, is maybe they're benchmarking the cholesterol blocking drug against some HDL, LDL markers, but they're not reporting that the people died 7 years earlier. So
Right.
what is the mark of really like, oh yes, okay, and okay, I kind of went two directions here. One is I'm even wildly optimistic that adults can can they won't have that growth curve on their side. It might take many more years, but uh, I still think this is a great. I've seen people getting results in a much later age. Um, what would you say? Well, I don't know. Why did I bring? Oh, the other part is the sad part of people spending all the money on the orthodontics and then they don't have the money to address the root cause. So is this, I mean, looking at it that way, that you could actually spend the money on orthodontics, and then if you really wanted to address the root cause, you'd need to spend more money and get the surgery to undo the orthodontics. Like that gets really expensive when you invest heavily in something. So how can you tell that something you're doing is going the wrong way? how can
Ah,
how can
the
someone
million
tell that?
dollar question.
Yeah.
I know my mom works with us as well, and she always tells patients, like it is far pricier to make the wrong decision or have to undo something in later on in life than to make the investment early on. But to your point, like how do you know, and how does the layperson out there know? There's so much information and so much of it is conflicting. I mean, I really stand alone in my community. There really, I mean, just geographically, there isn't anybody else doing the kind of work that I'm doing. And I'm sure that a lot of the specialists in my community disagree with my philosophy, and we would probably have a good argument about the kind of the root cause and why we do what we do. But I think it's important whenever you're evaluating a treatment option is to, one, get really clear about your own goals. What are you looking to accomplish for yourself? And to find a provider whose philosophy you're in alignment with. I mean, people know, they walk in and they hear my whole spiel about oral posture and how it influences facial growth. And we look at a lot of pictures of real people who have had this kind of treatment, and we talk about what that's like. And that's not something they've heard at any other consultation they've had, and intuitively it makes sense to them. Like, they're like, "Yeah, no, right, that makes sense," right? Because really, I mean, I love my profession, but dentistry and orthodontics, by and large, we are just fixing symptoms. We are not set up to be treating root causes. That's not what we learned in dental school. We don't even learn the root cause. All this business about oral posture influencing facial growth, that was nowhere in my dental school curriculum. And I can almost guarantee that's nowhere in the orthodontic specialty curriculum. I mean, that just isn't there. So you have to find providers then who are passionate enough to seek that kind of information for themselves, to then bring it to their patients. And it has to ring true. And I always tell people, when you go in for consultations, ask to see pictures. This is like especially in the kind of work I do, I always tell people, like, ask to see pictures. Lots of cases. You want to know, you want to see with your own eyes. If you come in and you tell me, I'm concerned about my child's weak chin or buck teeth, then I want to show you a lot of cases like your child, somebody who had a weak chin and buck teeth, and how we fixed that. And if that looks good to you and that's what you want, and this explanation makes sense, then you're probably in the right place. If you go someplace and they're not showing you a lot of photos, or the photos they are showing you just isn't really what you're looking for, um,
And what you're saying, I mean, results,
results,
results.
exactly,
And it could
results.
be that someone takes a clean little snapshot here of just perfectly lined up teeth and they miss the larger question. The
Yes,
larger goal is that since we
yes,
breathe 22,000 on average times a day, that we get the most from that, and that being the pressure pump. The movement of the diaphragm moves the lymphatic fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid. There's this, the flow of health is chi, and that movement, these powerful movements, is the bed of our brain, is the top, the roof of our mouth. I had one friend whose child, she did something in the same vein but a little different, like called ALF or something. And that child had really myopic vision, horribly, almost legally blind myopia. And then when they did the alpha and enough craniosacral work, the vision clarified. So the interconnectedness of systems is messy. The interconnectedness, and when people strive for marketing and selling and picking one specific thing, that's myopic. The problem here is myopic, zooming out to the whole structure,
Right.
and the lifespan, zooming out to lifespan, not just how's it going to feel or look for the next couple of years,
Right.
right? And
Right.
yeah, and more expensive in the beginning because you're
Yep.
making an investment,
Right.
right?
It also
Oh,
takes longer. So, I mean, just a quick point to the finances. I tell people like you want to also consider you have to consider amortizing this over many, many years, right? Like you're probably going to be working with your provider first of all for much longer than you would with a braces treatment plan. So, you got to think about, 3 years of treatment maybe versus 1 year or 18 months of treatment, and then you got to think about really what that's setting you up for in the long run. All the things you're not going to have to do to unwind maybe the wrong decision. So,
right, right. So results. And remind me, what was that quote again about the people who say you can't?
people who say that something can't be done should get out of the way of people who are actually doing it.
Who are actually doing it. Uh, okay, so what other patterns have you seen? Let's just say, even in the bigger population, just holding people back, keeping them away from a healthier oral and facial architecture.
Yeah, so this orthotropics airway centric dentistry also launched me more towards like an oral systemic health, what we now are calling functional dentistry, like akin to functional medicine, really getting at the root cause of that. And so really what you find out the more you peel back these layers is that, I mean, it's so foundational from the moment actually preconception. So now I'm working with moms to help optimize their oral microbiome, to get them ready to bring baby into the world, because what's happening in their mouth is going to influence what's happening in their baby's mouth. It may actually influence birth outcomes. We know that there are certain oral bacteria that can contribute to preterm birth and low birth weight and adverse pregnancy outcomes. And then once baby is born, I now have incorporated like infant frenectomies into my practice, because a baby who can't breastfeed, yep, if there's a tongue tie present or a lip tie present that's getting in the way of a baby breastfeeding, we know that, breastfeeding is one of the biggest influences upon that early facial growth and development. I mean, it's so beneficial from a structural point of view, not to mention nutritional and immune and all the other things, but from a structural point of view, it's so important. So, gosh, it starts so early, and then we continue to see them. I'm getting so much joy now out of treating these newborns and then getting to see them every 6 months, because every 6 months, as they're hitting a new milestone, there's another thing, right? Like now we have teeth. Let's talk about oral hygiene. Now we're eating solids. So what does that diet look like? What are we doing to build a healthy gut, which will influence a healthy mouth, and vice versa? And then what, even the textures of the food, like, I always joke like those pouches that I know are so convenient, are so convenient for families on the go. Everything has been pureed, smoothied, softened, and we're sucking our food when really we are meant to be chewing hard foods, right? We are meant to be chewing hard vegetables, and the Inuit are chewing on whale blubber, and the Maasai have, the foods they're eating that are just so much more texturally hard and require actual engagement of our jaw muscles. And if you know anything about physiology, right, like you build bone and muscle by using it. So how could you possibly grow a well-developed jaw if you're eating pureed, soft, processed foods all the time?
I've got to jump in on this. You said so many important things. One is, I remember when my son was littler, because my partner and his parents had very fine bone structures. Like I was this thick, like Germanic farm woman stock. And I was like, wow, I wonder, my child is almost a genetic clone to my husband, it looks like. But he took up a hobbies of parkour and of mountain bike riding, with giant jumps. And he got the super dense bones. He started very, very much in the sparrow bone family. And then through the course of through his whole childhood using his body a lot. All his whole structure, all of the bone thickened up. And it was really interesting to see, quote, the genetics drift, right? How profound his movement choices were on the way his body developed. And of
Right.
course, your work with him was super profound. We're a little sloppy though, I have to admit. I mean, my teeth are a little crooked, his teeth are a little crooked. Oh my God. And your story about having to undo your sister having to undo something. So I got to tell you this: breastfeeding, yes, he had some issues at birth, unfortunately, but then I knew to breastfeed, and I even though I had a job and it was hard, I fed him for 4 years, and
Wow.
people were shaming me.
Mm.
Oh, you must get him off the boob. He's got to be independent. And I was sleeping with him. He also had apnea though, so I slept with him and made sure nothing bad would happen. And the problem
Right.
is, then when we fell into the Western the using nuclear bombs to solve a problem that flowers and fresh food would be better to solve. They actually his teeth did rot, and I now know what I know when he was a baby, and they thought it was the breast milk, and it was a whole bunch of things, and it wasn't the breastfeeding, but
Right.
uh, then they put these metal caps on a lot of his teeth, and then he started to react to those because he was already neurologically sensitive, and then we had to pay someone to take those off,
Right.
and then we found you finally, and we were like, oh God, his baby teeth are even almost like, oh God, we didn't even get the baby teeth right. I was like, what the hell are we going to do? And now, you know round two, he's good. And I've even heard about regenerating the teeth with mineralizing protocols. Have
Yes.
you heard much about that?
Oh yeah, we do a lot of that in our practice now, actually, using remineralization protocols, right? So, and this kind of gets into the fluoride conversation a little bit, but
Tell me.
yeah. So, teeth are constantly demineralizing, remineralizing throughout the course of a day. The pH of our mouth is changing after we eat. Up to 30 minutes after we eat, we're kind of in a demineralization state because we are more acidic pH, and then we give our saliva a chance to buffer. If we're not constantly eating all day long, if we give our saliva a chance to buffer, we enter more of a remineralizing state. And so when we talk about cavities, caries, and even gum disease, it's kind of similar root causes here. Um, a lot of these cavities form because of multiple effects on the oral microbiome. It's not just because people aren't doing an adequate job brushing and flossing, which I can not tell you how frustrating it is as a dentist, or was at least in the first part of my career where I didn't know about this and understand really this whole concept of being able to remineralize teeth. It was so frustrating to have to sit there and tell a patient, as I'm sure it was for the patient to hear it, you just need to do a better job brushing and flossing. That's so unfair. I mean, yes, that's important. I don't want to underplay how important oral hygiene is. It's absolutely essential to the picture here, and it's not the only piece to the picture. And so, I was working with patients who were doing an exceptional job brushing and flossing. And every time I saw them, it was like there was a new cavity. And it's maddening, really. So now understanding that, yeah, wow, there are lots of influences on the oral microbiome, what we're eating, how frequently we're eating, whether we're mouth breathing, that is huge. Who we're in relationship with, whose bacteria are we being exposed to on a daily basis, what kinds of products. I used to think like a toothpaste was a toothpaste was a toothpaste, like just pick one and use it. That's not the case, right? So, and as this awareness has grown, so too have the products that are available to us been able to kind of come in and fill the need that we have in dentistry. Like, can we make safe, clean products that also help to remineralize and restore our teeth? And the answer is yes. Now we can do that. We can do that with things like nanohydroxyapatite and
That's what
things that
I use.
helped.
Yes.
Yes, things that help to neutralize the pH in our mouth, and xylitol sugars that kill the cariogenic bacteria, and lip taping to prevent us from mouth breathing at night, and all of these things, right, that we can do, um, to help nourish our oral microbiome rather than, as you said, using the nuclear bomb to just kill everything and actually potentially make things worse for people.
Right. It was so awful when we had to have those caps removed from Seb because at the time he was also allergic to anesthesia. I mean, it
Oh,
was just so awful. It was Oh, and the dentist we were working with was even sort of under scrutiny because it was going against the mainstream thought
Right.
around what's responsible oral hygiene.
Right.
And yet really I found out much later the root cause, you're talking about the multifactorial oral biome issue, but also I didn't know until years later when they had blamed the breastfeeding for what something else did, that if you have a raging high fever for several days when you're teeny tiny, it can really eat at the enamel of the
Yep.
the growing baby teeth. He had had something like scarlet fever for 3 days when he was like 2 years old, and they're blaming me. It's kind of like you having to tell the patient, "You should have brushed and flossed better." Yeah, so, the good news is we can regenerate, like you're saying, there are things we can fix with our own agency that we as long as we get the right blueprint, and the ancestral blueprint, it has a look. We can look at our grandparents, great-grandparents. They weren't going to the dentist every couple of months, and and yeah, there are a lot of variables there as well. And I want to follow up though on the jaw strength because that's
Mhm.
another trend out there is people getting like jawzercisers, to
Yes.
replace to enhance the muscular function, even though they're not chewing. I get the A plan is you chew your carrots and eat eat food that and not just drink smoothies 24 hours a day. But what do you think about those as a strategy when you've got this gap of where you are and where you wanna be?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things now that are coming on the market. I'm just so actually thrilled that this whole concept of oral posture has gone viral. The Mews put their last name on it. They call it mewing, and it's all over TikTok and all over Insta. And I see these teenagers come in, and there's a whole face thing that they do, and people it's been like brought into popular mainstream culture, and it's lovely because gosh, that does more than half my work for me when people come in and I and I start to talk to them. They no longer look at me like, I've never heard this before. They look at me like, oh yeah, my kid saw that on TikTok. So all of those products that are now being brought to market, I think really are just along the same lines of like it's basically myofunctional therapy is what it is, right? It's orofacial myofunctional therapy. So I've been referring for orofacial myofunctional therapy for over 15 years, and that has been in existence for much longer than that. And this is just along the same lines, right? It's like the difference between going and getting a home workout system and then hiring a trainer to help you through it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Uh, so I know when I did a little face yoga, I was also restructuring my everyday movements. So also there's a relationship. If your pelvis is in a certain place and your head goes a certain way, or the other way, your mouth breathing and the weight of your tongue starts to dampen your airway, and then the rest of your body is following that as well. It can go. I've observed it being able to go both ways, and I had changed the way I walked, changed the way I did a variety of things. And I was telling you before we started the call that I started some face yoga, and one of them was a really ugly movement of reaching my tongue towards my nose, and when my son had Tourette's, which he doesn't anymore. Hello, hello.
Yeah.
When he had Tourette's, that was one of his own tics. And now I know he was doing self oral myofascial therapy because when I did it, teeth that I've had, my whole life that had never closed. I had this gap in my teeth because we never did orthodontics. Thank goodness, right? And when I started just doing this, a couple of tongue exercises as because I did it for vanity reasons, like oh I want to look this way. And then my double chin was going away. And then my teeth closed. I was shocked that it was that easy. I was just 2 minutes a night. I did some tongue things to like firm up this tissue. Maybe I'll try jawzercising and mewing as well. Oh, okay, I got it. So what one thing I got totally wrong is I would hear Jeannie coach tongue to spot, tongue to spot. People say that all over, tongue to spot. I would put the tip of my tongue in the spot, but the rest of my tongue was hanging.
Ah,
I
right.
did I didn't get that the tongue sort of has a little suction, like and maybe that's
Yes.
what mewing's all about is that
Getting it up there.
and you think of
Yeah.
the African tribesmen going so, I didn't understand that it's like a car that has a leaky gasket. The engine's not gonna have the pressure because if that's leaky, you have to inhale through your mouth because or you have to use all these auxiliary muscles in the neck and the back to pull in versus if you get a nice deep exhale with your deep core, nice deep exhale, then the inhale just rushes in, but the tongue has to be in the right place. So
Right.
as a posture, a functional movement teacher, I help people break down that they really can do a lot for themselves by checking that tongue position. But I have to say, I spent the last week mouth breathing because I was recovering from a crazy toxic mold exposure. Oh, it's miserable. I love the book Breathe. Did you read the book Breathe?
Oh yeah, Breath
Oh,
by
oh,
James
breath.
Nestor.
Oh, I love
Yes.
that. Oh,
Yeah.
so much we can do. So,
Yes.
so if someone wants to take charge of their, oh, you've given so many, pick a toothpaste. I used one that, what's it called? Hydroxy.
Hydroxyapatite, which is actually what your enamel is made of, right? And so it helps to remineralize your tooth with the stuff that your tooth is made of, as opposed to fluoride, which is not naturally in teeth. So why we don't have a fluoride deficiency in our teeth. We have a nanohydroxyapatite deficiency. So there are different molecule sizes, right? Nano versus micro. So nano is kind of the smallest particle you can get. Where you source the particle from matters. So I know there are lots of brands now that have hydroxyapatite in it, but where they're getting it matters. So there are, I think, 4 or 5 brands right now, to my knowledge, like Risewell and Boca and Fig and Cocoa Floss and um, yeah, I think there might be another one that have this sourced from the correct, like the manufacturer that's making the most effective form of this molecule. So yeah, picking up that's a great first step. Why don't we just clear the toxic crap out of the bathroom? Like that's a
Oh
great
yeah,
first
and
step.
and believe it or not, I actually had fluoride poisoning as a kid. I have these grooves in my teeth because I thought the mint taste of Crest was like candy, and I would just sit there and eat it. And I've got
Yeah.
these messy grooves. So people pushing the fluoride, guys, I know for real. This other stuff, I use Boca. It's
Yeah.
it's it's amazing. It's been working really well. And the another thing is about, we talked about that tongue to spot really being this gentle seal on, of
Hmm.
the tongue, pressure on the roof of your mouth. um, and I described some of the mechanisms in breathing that then your posture changes a lot if you're training the right thing. One thing I've also learned to teach people is don't take a deep breath, take a deep exhale. So the inhale is what fills you up. And Buteko's steps was something I think we learned from you and Jeannie,
Yeah.
as ways to clear the nasal passages as you're getting used to sleeping with your, especially sleeping
Yeah.
because I can log 8 hours a night, nasal breathing all night. Even, my athletic performance just jumped dramatically, even though I hadn't even realized, okay, this is another one of those things. Like, how do you know you have a problem when there's no apparent obvious problem? The fact that I had slight sore throats most of my life, I had no idea that was because every night at a certain time, my mouth would open and I was drying out my airway so often. Now,
Yeah.
right now, I'm kind of bad because of my recent toxic mold crazy exposure. But mouth taping, I needed to learn Buteyko steps so that I could wear the gentle mouth tape and for it to make that transition. I think that's one of the biggest bangs for the buck out there is mouth taping at night. Do you? Oh, you don't have to mouth tape
Oh
anymore.
no, I do. I've mouth taped since I learned about it like 17 years ago. One of the things I learned when I learned lip taping was, they said, well, eventually you won't need to do this. Your lips will just naturally stay together. And I can tell you 17 years later, that is not always the case. So I tape my lips every night when I go to sleep. If I'm taking a nap, they get taped. If I'm on an airplane and I'm going to fall asleep, they 100% get taped. So yeah, I'm never anywhere without my tape. And I agree. I tell people this all the time. This is actually part of my oral hygiene instruction. We go over lip taping and I tell them this is the cheapest, easiest hack that has, I think, the most bang for your buck. It makes so many positive changes in your health, not out even outside of your oral health. Like, yes, it can help to cut down on cavity rate, it can decrease gum inflammation, but it also is going to decrease the frequency with which you're getting sick. It's going to make for a more restful sleep. If you're breathing through your mouth, you're not filtering your air, you're not warming it, you're not humidifying it. So you're taking in a whole ton of particulate that your body can't filter out. That's what your nose is designed to do. And then ultimately, a lot of that's making its way down into your gut where your immune system lives. So it's increasing your anxiety. It's increasing, yeah, like I said, the frequency with which you're getting sick. Lots of issues having to do with mouth breathing. So keep those lips closed at night. The other thing I wanted to mention too is that having your tongue up to the roof of the mouth and developing a proper swallow. So we've been talking about your rest oral posture, but the swallow is the other super critical thing. A proper swallow that sees the tongue up at the roof of the mouth, the lips closed, no tongue thrusting, no pushing your tongue in weird directions. It acts like a pump for the brain. So it's a pump for the pituitary gland, which can help to secrete your growth hormone. It's also a pump for the lymphatic system, which is the basically the system in your brain that clears out that amyloid plaque. So when we talk about longevity and brain health, developing a proper swallow from very early on is also super important.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, in the functional movement world, the equivalent is developing a walk, because you walk thousands of steps, and often we have to go all the way back to retraining the foot, not just sticking them in a barefoot shoe, but retraining the one of the other main pumps of our body is our calves. Is it has to get all that, the lymphatic flow and all the blood has to get back up. And when
Yep.
we walk with these splatted duck feet and this splatted pelvis, we're not using our pumps. They're not using our springs and pumps. Cool. Well, I'm gonna have to work on that one because I'm ready to go next level. So, all right. Any other? I mean, there we could go on all day, I'm sure, because we have so much. We know so much great stuff. So, what? How about this? So the biggest bang for the buck for getting started now, mouth taping, even if you think you're mostly a nasal breather. I mean, it sounds like if you live in a modern, mostly highly chemicalized food supply and highly chemicalized clothing, you probably should mouth tape, and there might be a process to prepare you for that, whether it's
Yes, I think that's important to mention. Like, you may not be somebody who can just jump into mouth taping. Certainly, if you're having obstructive sleep apnea, you need to be careful with that. If you know the if you can sit comfortably and breathe through your nose for about 2 minutes and not breathe through your mouth, um, that's a good indication that you're likely somebody who can be kind of jump into lip taping at night. But if you struggle to do that when you're awake, to actually sit there for like 2 minutes and breathe through your nose, you are not a great candidate for lip taping at night. You really need to work on opening up your nasal cavity, and that can look like all sorts of things, right? I mean, it can be your nutritional choices and what you're like responding to. It can be air purifiers in the room. It can be nasal hygiene and saline rinses, and it can be working with an allergist. There's all sorts of things that can look like, but you just need to be aware. I don't want people who
yeah.
threatening themselves, suffocating themselves at night.
No,
So
I have to say it
yeah,
was scary, and it's also I was using a lightweight there's a lightweight tape so that your tongue just barely touching it kinda knocks it open and you don't do something dramatic. Yeah, that it's
yeah.
gotta be thoughtful, but
Yes.
then once you have the practice, it's a really one of the easiest ways to rebalance the gases, the carbon dioxide and
Yep.
oxygen levels.
Yep.
Athletes, athletically and longevity wise, that's and sadly things are upside down. When people have
Right.
inflammatory conditions, they're giving them oxygen. Oxygen, pure oxygen is an inflammatory. Carbon dioxide is anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
So the story is almost everywhere we turn there's an inversion that's very risky to just follow the crowd. And so if we look at results and we look at results across cultures about how good things could be, and we look across times about how good things could be, or what solutions that are not highly marketed really work and really don't. I think, yeah, it's dangerous to just blindly follow anybody's authority, I have to say, if it's not tied to some other way of measuring.
Right.
So, okay, all right, Dr. Ariana, you're here in Scotts Valley in the Santa Cruz area of California. That's Northern California. How can people learn more about you? Your website. Are you presenting at conferences? Do you travel to work with people? Do they all come to you?
Yeah, so you can certainly learn about us on our website, functionalsmiles.com. I practice with my father and my sister, and we have a functional dental practice here in Scotts Valley. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. I should check this to make sure. I always forget my own handle, but at dr.ariana.e.
I'll put
The
that definitely
in
in
the
the
show
show
notes,
notes.
maybe. Yep. Um, and do I travel? I don't travel to see people, but people travel to see me
Do you
from
do
all over. I mean,
remote consultations as
it's
well, or?
I can do remote consultations, but the nature of my work is such that you have to kind of like come in, it's hands-on. It's me like
Yeah, and you
doing
take the
things in the mouth.
X-rays and you do a lot
Yeah.
of different
So,
things.
we can certainly have those intro conversations online, but ultimately people end up traveling to see me. And I treat people from, I've had patients come from Oregon, Southern California, Arizona, like they do travel, and including just our kind of local area. And that's probably the best way to follow our work and find out more about what we do. Orthotropics is something I do, but it's also just one piece of like a much broader picture in terms of getting to holistic holistic dentistry kind of root causes of why people are dealing with what they're dealing with.
Root cause. Yeah, and it involves movement. What you're
Yeah.
talking about involves movement. There's no the only time we're not moving is when we're dead. It's the opposite of movement is not stillness, it's death. So you're working with these dynamic biotensegrous systems that you can shape. All right. Well, I'm just really happy you changed my life better, me and Sebi's life better forever.
Thank
And
you so much for allowing me to be a part of that.
we're making this world a better place thanks to people like you and the great information you're sharing. All
Thanks,
right,
Deb.
we're going to sign off there. I'll put in the show notes Dr. Ariana's website and her Instagram handle, and start taking care of your oral posture, people. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.